All right, everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is one of our inaugural career episodes from Service to School. We're going to be sharing going forward some career resources for veterans. If you've been paying attention over the last few months, we've had a bunch of webinars focused a lot on consulting, finance, tech. Today we're going to delve deeper into a new topic, and that is, broadly speaking, buying a business. It's called, people call it a search fund, entrepreneurship through acquisition, independent sponsorship. But we've got a fantastic guest here. Jed is a U.S. Air Force veteran, and he has a lot of experience in the space. And he's here to tell us about the good, bad, and the ugly about buying a business. Jed, can you introduce yourself to the listeners, and then just provide us a little bit about your background and how you got into buying a business and what your experience was like with it?
Yeah, of course. Hey, thanks for having me, Alec. A huge fan of Service to School. I actually used the program for informational purposes when I transitioned out, so I love what the organization is doing. Like you mentioned, I'm an Air Force veteran, 10 years. Most of that time was financial management, also some acquisition work. And then when I got out in 2020, or just prior, like many veterans, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So of course I went and got my MBA, which was a great experience for me. Considered, consulting, finance, and all the traditional routes. Ultimately went to big tech, transitioned to Microsoft, became a software engineer, got to work on building out the Azure cloud for federal clients, which is I really started to like tech there. But then kind of stumbled across this whole idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition, kind of on accident, actually. Back in 2021, before it was cool online to go buy a business, it was kind of relegated to the Harvard ETA conference, the Chicago booth ETA conference, and then I didn't go to Stanford, but I know they have their own conference out there. But it was before it was like really exciting. So kind of got interested, really kind of struck a nerve with me. Ended up launching a self-funded search part-time while still working in big tech. Ultimately acquired two small firms in Southern California. Things went well for a little while until they drastically did not, and those firms ended up going bankrupt, which left me with a lot of personally guaranteed debt that I had to get through. On the back end of that, I launched Sunset Coast Capital, which is an independent sponsor firm, and now I focus specifically on defense and defense contracting firms. So I'm excited to be here. I've got a lot of the good and the ugly, side of ETA, and happy to help vets get a better understanding of the space while also avoiding some of the major pitfalls.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like, these hard lessons are often the most valuable, and so we'll definitely be getting into those. And the big thing that I always tell my fellow vets is that getting rich is hard, no matter how you do it. And really, anybody who tells you that there is a easy path to wealth is selling you something.
Yeah.
So the reality is that this is definitely the path that you've gone down is definitely a path to a lot of success, but it comes with a lot of pitfalls. So I'd like to kind of kick it off with talking about the types of businesses people buy. Everybody, the new buzzword is boring businesses.
Yeah.
So like, when you look at businesses, what type of businesses do you try to acquire, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think the popular route is to go for home services businesses for a lot of reasons. They typically have very strong cash flow. Usually you're going for something that's got lower capex. So, you're looking for something where you can theoretically put a lot of debt on the business and then still be able to operate. And just to set the playing field, everything we're talking about here is a leveraged buyout. What PE firms have been doing forever. When we're talking about you doing it specifically as a self-funded searcher, as an independent buyer, you're most likely going to leverage the SBA, which means you're putting a lot of debt on the business. And so if you're going to buy a company, it needs to be one that has strong cash flow. And home services businesses tend to have that. They tend to have good cash flow. They tend to be in industries that are like more recession resistant. It really doesn't matter how bad things get. You're probably not going to cancel your plumber if you need them. And so that's why they tend to be popular. And there's a lot of them. There's 29 million small businesses in America, and well over a third of them tend to be home services businesses. So it's a ripe field. And you'll hear everyone talking about how most of the owners in the space are quite old. So there's an opportunity for transition.
Yeah, the silver revolution. And so I'm a big believer in that. I've just been having a lot of conversations with people about the future of AI, which jobs are going away. There have been a lot of articles written about the future of consulting with AI coming along, and as well as other professional services. So some of the typical very high paying jobs may be a lot harder to come by and a lot scarcer. But at the end of the day, like, AI is not going to fix my toilet. Um,
Not yet, yeah.
Yeah, not yet. It's not gonna do HVAC work for me. So I think that definitely the space is one that I wouldn't say is disruption proof, but definitely more disruption resistant than a lot of other ones. Now, like, one thing I want to hone in on is that SVA loan. Like, I've heard it kicked around. Can you talk about that and what exactly that means,
Sure,
and
yeah.
the personal guarantee aspect of it?
Oh, I'll absolutely touch on that. Now, let me step back just to kind of set the playing field real fast. So, regardless of the model that people use, the terms, at the end of the day, all we're talking about is buying a business. Traditionally, private equity would take out bank debt and buy a company, right? So, the way this kind of got started, back in like the 70s, originally at Stanford and then moving to Harvard, was the idea of, hey, instead of a private equity firm going out and, using debt and buying a company, what if we sponsored a hard-charging MBA graduate and gave them a couple $100,000, and then also our financial backing to go buy a smaller company that could then grow it for 5 or 7 years, get an exit, experience a really good economic outcome. And that's where the traditional search fund model came from, and that's still alive and well today. The difference, though, is that if you're going to raise a search fund, that is largely reserved for people within those networks. Like, you typically are in the Harvard, Chicago, Stanford network, sometimes Columbia or NYU, but you really do need to be in those networks because that's where it's very common and the investor base is used to that because they're going to take a huge risk on you to get started. So for 99% of people who want to go out there and kind of do this model, what we're talking about is the self-funded searcher model. And by doing that, you're most likely going to leverage the SBA program. The SBA 7A program allows individuals like you and me, as long as we have a heartbeat and a U.S. citizenship, we can take out up to $5 million in acquisition debt to buy a company, as long as that company cash flows. And that's sponsored through small lending organizations and banks all throughout the country. And so, as a theoretical model, if you want to go buy a company and you knew you could borrow up to $5 million, I can do that with as little as 10% down. So $500,000, now I can buy $5 million worth of asset.
Wow.
And be the 100% owner on that, not a small equity amount. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, though, is that you put a sizable amount of debt on the company when you do that, and it becomes very risky. And so there's definitely this give and take when it comes to debt versus equity, but that's largely speaking the SBA model. It was originally designed to help current small business owners be able to leverage additional capital to be able to grow, buy competitors, do things like that. But over the last 10 to 15 years, it's become very fashionable for first-time non-business owners to use that as a mechanism of leveraging debt to be able to buy a company, and that's why it's gotten so popular. It is a great program. It is unique to the United States. A lot of other people around the world don't have programs like this. And I have conversations with searchers in Spain, in Australia, South America, all throughout Europe, even Canada, and they lament the fact that they don't have an SBA program, because like so many things, if you have a program that allows you to leverage that much money for very, very little, I mean, that's an incredible opportunity. Now, the flip side of that, though, is the personal guarantee. And through this, the SBA says, hey, we'll sponsor you and we'll give you this kind of debt, but as a requirement, you have to sign a personal guarantee, which means that you're personally responsible for the debt you take out. So as when you're working in business, a limited liability company or any kind of corporation is a liability shield. So if the business fails, it doesn't impact you personally. So this personal guarantee is specifically designed to pierce that corporate shield. It says that by taking out this money, you are personally liable for it. And so you need to be very aware of the fact that if you take out SBA debt that your net worth cannot cover, which is most likely going to be for everybody. If that's the case and the business goes under, you will absolutely be declaring personal bankruptcy. So it is a very real risk. I've experienced it myself, what that feels like to go through, a personally guaranteed settlement in bankruptcy, and it's not fun. And anyone who does not make that clear and doesn't highlight those risks and tells you that, oh, it's not a big deal because only 3-4% of SBA loans default, which is total BS, to be clear, is not telling you the full truth.
Oh, wow. And so let's talk about worst case scenarios, because before we talk about upside, let's make sure people
Absolutely.
understand the downside. And so to be clear, if you take out a loan to buy that business and that business fails, and the reason it would fail is because the cash flow can't cover the debt payments.
Right. Yeah.
Um, you are, yeah, the business boards up, everybody gets fired. That's not going to be not a fun day to fire employees, right? And then on top of that, you've got that much of personally guaranteed debt, which you can't guarantee, like likely will not be able to personally make those debt payments, and so you'll personally have to declare bankruptcy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a million and one ways a small business can fail. If you look at the statistics, the number one is cash. You simply run out of cash. It doesn't matter if I'm bringing in three, four, $10 million of revenue, but if that revenue doesn't turn into actual cash in my bank account that I can actually make payroll and pay my bills, then the business closes. So
Yeah,
cash conversion cycle is everything. It's the lifeblood of a small business.
yeah, and that's and to me the question then comes into, and we'll start talking about like business acquisition decisions and which ones you've looked for, which ones you
Yeah.
think are good calls. But the question I always ask is, why are you selling this business if it's such a good deal?
Yeah.
You know, and at the same time, if it's a positive cash flow or a good giving you good cash flow, why don't you just hire a manager so you can kind of
Sure.
sit back and enjoy that? And so at the same time, so there is a lot of risk involved, and so it's not finding the right business is very tough. The cash flow is a significant risk, and so let's get into like the businesses that you think would be a decent investment for veterans.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not a believer that there are good and bad industries. I think there are good and bad industries for individual buyers. It really depends on your experience and what you bring to the table. So, for instance, it's generally understood that restaurants are very, very difficult businesses and ones that most people would not be good off buying. And I would agree with that. However, if you grew up in a family where your family owned a restaurant and you spent all your life working in restaurants, then you're probably uniquely qualified to work in a restaurant. That doesn't mean that it's the best leveraged opportunity for your time, but it definitely does mean that maybe you have a better shot at making that successful than someone else. But generally speaking, if we're looking at a company that is probably a good fit for you, first and foremost, I would highly recommend everyone to read the Harvard Business Review Guide to Buying a Small Business. It is just the straight up guide to doing it. They've been doing this for a long time, and the idea there is that it's going to give you a very general understanding of things to look for and things to avoid. What does a perfect world look like? And it's going to tell you, I'm looking for a business, hopefully in home services, something that is in an industry where you're less likely to be impacted by things like recessions and tariffs and things of that nature. But then I'm also looking for different levels of profitability. So I'm looking for more revenue is better than lower revenue. Like that seems pretty obvious. But not all revenue is created equal. Recurring revenue from subscriptions or contracts is better than one-off projects because it's a little bit more repeatable and I can kind of forecast that forward. And the customers tend to be stickier. I'm looking for things that are a little less capital intensive. So if it requires a lot of trucks and machinery, that's going to be less interesting than one that requires maybe just people and phone calls and computers. If it's something that can be done largely digitally and online, then obviously that's going to be more attractive than one that requires a warehouse and a bunch of tools. And so there's a lot of trade-offs that come into this. There's no perfect opportunity, but again, highly recommend veterans look at companies that at least they may not have direct experience in, but they've got some tangential experience. So if you're coming from, if you're like my brother and you were in the Marine Corps and you fixed F-18s and you're an avionics mechanic, then maybe working in aerospace manufacturing makes more sense to you because obviously you can't do everything, but at the very least you understand the industry, you understand the terminology, you understand how things should look, and it's less of a learning curve. So that might be a better fit for you than for somebody else. And that's not to say that if you were a pilot in the Air Force, you can't buy an HVAC company. You absolutely can. It's just you have to be aware of the additional risk of learning how to run a company that you have no experience in. And I always tell people, I call it the sleeves test. Like, how soon can you roll up your sleeves and get in there and do the job? Because it's not just the job you have to learn, but if it's licensed, then you also have to get that license too. So there's a lot of things to consider. There's no like surefire, oh, this is the right opportunity and this is the wrong opportunity. But there definitely are some critical risks that you need to watch out for in every one of them.
Gotcha. And I want to go back a little bit to your experience. So when you find a business to buy, like how do you even do that? Like I know there's like online brokers. I don't know if there's any of those that you can recommend, but I'd just be interested to hear a little bit more about how you found the businesses and in ways other places veterans can look to find find businesses to buy if they're
Yeah, there's that's a great question. There's three primary ways of doing it. Number one is online aggregators, websites, BizBuySell, Axial, Rejig, like all of these online aggregators. Um, Let me be really clear. If you're looking for listings on an online aggregator, there is no online aggregator that has listings that are not already individually listed by a broker. And so let's just be really clear about that right now. Like, there are a few that their online platforms are exclusive to the brokers that they use, but they're just a digital representation of what brokers are already listing. And so if you find something on BizBuySell, don't think that it's only there. Like everyone else is looking at it too. So that's something to really be aware of. That's one way of finding companies. It's the easiest way to find a company, and it's also the worst way to find a company, to be completely honest with you, because the vast majority of companies that end up on an online aggregator, like they're going to be picked over immediately. Most of them have already been looked at by the broker who is representing them, and anything that's pretty good is going to be picked up fast. And so it's definitely, I'm not saying don't look. I'm saying have your filters there, know what your buy box is, and then if anything hits it, yes, I mean don't look away. But that is the easiest place to look, and it's the less likely place to find something actually worth buying. The next step, though, which is a much better, is to build direct relationships with brokers themselves. And this takes a lot of time. It takes people skills. It takes relationship building. It takes you being able to get yourself in front of a broker and be able to validate yourself as a qualified buyer, someone that they should actually listen to, and you actually have an opportunity to buy a company. That's important because good brokers are they're getting slammed with hundreds of emails a day from everyone from investment bankers all the way down to like tire kickers with no money, saying, hey, I want to buy a company, here's what I'm looking for. And so they will miss you in the noise. So you need to be able to stand out and need to be able to show that, hey, I'm a real person, I'm qualified, I'm interested, I've got the financial backing. So you have to be able to get their attention and build that relationship. And the goal is that when you're able to do that and you're able to be very, very clear about what you're looking for and your ability to close, which is tough because you've never bought a company. But once you do that, the hope is that that broker will know, like, and trust you. And then when they find something that they think might fit your buy box, you're the first person they ping. So it takes more time. It's a lot of work. It's hard to do if you're not able to show yourself as a qualified buyer. And also, let's be clear, the whole industry of business brokerage is a mess because there's no license to be a business broker. It's literally anyone can raise their hand and say, I'm now a business broker. All the way up to middle market to where you get to M&A advisors and middle market investment bankers. So as a result, it takes a lot of time and work to determine which brokers are actually good, which ones actually have good deal flow, and which ones you want to build those relationships with. And so it does take time. And then finally, the third way of doing it is the off-market search. And it sounds exciting and glamorous, but you're quite literally looking for a needle in a haystack. It is very difficult. It takes a lot of time. And it basically involves you aggregating as much proprietary off-market data as possible from as many different sources as possible and executing a lot of really good cold outreach, so emails, phone calls, all that kind of stuff, and then leveraging unscalable things such as like showing up to industry conferences and door knocking and meeting up and to meet owners where they are at like suppliers or chambers of commerce, and that sort of thing. So very unscalable. And so I really recommend that if someone's looking for a business to buy, they actually follow that flow directly. Start by setting up your filters on online marketplaces just so you're not missing anything. Then directly go into building out your broker network, because once you can build out that leverage, that's going to give you the time to build out some leverage on your off-market search. Because if you just skip straight to off-market search, you're probably going to spend 20 years and not find anything.
Gotcha. And so there's a lot of different ways to do it, and
Yeah.
you gotta. It seems like just you've got to mix up the methods, try a little bit of everything until you find the right one. And so the question I want to ask you is, so you're going through all these different methods,
Yep.
right? One pops up that you're interested in. What are some red flags that people should be looking for here?
Sure. The biggest red flag is simply the financials. I think a lot of people focus on the financials too much. The truth is that having good financials is simply table stakes to play the game. Like the financial of the business have to be able to support the acquisition structure, the debt you're going to put on the company. It has to be able to cash flow post close at a reasonable rate. If it can't do that, then there's no point of us even having a conversation. So step one is just understanding whether or not the financials and the economics make sense. And unfortunately, you're not going to know that until further along in the deal, because the vast majority of CIMs, which are the just the memorandums you see online. Like if you look at a company on like an online marketplace, or if you reach out with a broker, they're going to put together a CIM, which is just a brochure of this company. The vast majority of those are total trash. They're not worth it. And I say that because most brokers are not very good at putting together CIMs. Most online CIMs are inaccurate, and even the ones that are put together, most owners are very bad at putting together data on their companies. And so you come at this from a position of you have to kind of filter based on the information they're giving you, but you also have to understand that information is probably not correct. And it's obviously put in a position to make them look as good as possible. And so when you do find something that kind of starts ticking your boxes and you think this looks interesting, then it's a very repeatable pattern. You reach out, you ask for an introductory call, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, and then you request further information, which is, I want to see the last 3 to 5 years of financials. I just want to be able to verify, at least on a cursory level. I'm not diving into due diligence, but I just want to get a basic understanding of, do these financials make sense? And is this worth having a further conversation? And there is a give and take there, because if I'm a seller and I've got a good company, I'm not just going to hand out, my financials to anybody who signs an NDA. I'm going to want to know, again, are you a qualified buyer? Are you someone that if you sign this NDA and I give you 5 years of financials, do you actually have any money? Do you have any cash? Yeah, I mean, can you provide? Not everyone requires a proof of funds, but if they ask you, like, I don't understand why that's unreasonable for you as the buyer. So it is definitely a give and take, and it takes time to get there. So first and foremost is always the financials, just to get in the door. But bar none, the biggest red flag is the seller themselves, because the seller is always the biggest factor in every single deal. A small business is the direct reflection of the owner. And so however that business is operated is going to be directly referred to however that individual seller operates in their own lives. And that leads to a lot of risk for the buyer themselves.
That's all really, I mean, it's very relevant, because in my case, it's like I was listening to you, and it's so interesting to hear the parallels, because I worked in private equity. Well, I worked in McKinsey's private equity practice doing due diligences, and so much of what you're saying holds true for any deal. So like from the individual looking to buy a business, the same as is very similar to like what a PE firm looks to do. And we would always look for the quantitative aspects. You'd have to value a company, and that'll kind of come into the next thing I'm going to talk about. But also you're looking at the human aspect of it. Will this company fit well into your existing portfolio? Are the employees working well? Is there a risk of kind of internal disruption? Will like a key person quit? Yeah. These kind of things you ask around. We'd have calls where we'd ask different people in the industry what they thought about a particular company.
And I mean, you're nailing it right on the head. Yeah, you're exactly right. And one of the big mistakes I made early on was I did not weigh the cultural aspect heavily enough. I like a lot of first-time buyers, I overemphasized the financials, which was a mistake. The financials absolutely have to be there. But the biggest impact, whether or not you're going to be successful, is number one, is the seller a person of integrity? Because if they want to, let's be really clear, the seller could absolutely screw you on this deal, before, during, and after the deal. And I've got a whole book coming out filled with stories like that. But the second part of that is the cultural aspect, because sometimes, we make this mistake of drawing a comparison to small business ownership and real estate. And the key difference is that with real estate, if everything goes to shit, there's some sort of asset there. There's some sort of land and building, some sort of value. On a small business, there is none. The asset value is negligible. Even on heavy machinery, that is usually going to be sold at salvage value, and the overall assets are less than 5% of the tangible value of the business. And so what it really is a connection of people who are working together to create economic value 20x what any of them could do themselves. And as a result, that's what you're buying. You're buying the culture. Yes, you're buying the cash, you're buying the customers, you're buying the vendors, all that stuff, but you're buying the people that actually get that done. And so that's why your biggest risk is always the seller, because they're the ones controlling the environment and the culture of that business. And then two, they're the ones who hired the team and put that team together. And if that's not a good fit for you, it's not going to work out well for you.
Yeah, that's so true, and that's where we're going to get into a little bit of your personal story. And I know we're up against the clock a little bit because you're a busy person and you've got some calls to make.
It just means we'll have to do a part two.
Yes. Let's cover the due diligence essentials. And so what I'd like for you to share to our viewers, viewers. I was going to say listeners, but they're watching it on YouTube, so it'll be our viewers. How you conduct a due diligence and how you value a company. Like when you assess how much you should be paying for a business, how do you do it? And I know it varies industry to industry, but I'd like to hear how you personally have done that.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave me a real softball there. So I'll kind of walk through the process overall. Let's assume you find a company that you're interested in. You have that introductory call with the owner. They seem like somebody that you can really get along with. The numbers at a base level look pretty good. And so, and let's also assume that you're a self-funded searcher. You're going to utilize the SBA 7A program. So going into this, let's say it looks good. You see the financials. You kind of hit it off with the seller a little bit. You sign the NDA. Everything looks decent. And so now you're ready to write the letter of intent, which is your non-binding offer to buy the company. And so when you're putting that together, there's a few things you want to look out for. One, you want to make sure that the company you're looking at has consistent cash flow over several years. So a couple things you don't want to have. You don't want to find a company that's in distress. You don't want to find a company where the cash flow has been declining the last couple of years, even if there's a good story for it, because that increases your risk dramatically. One, because you've never owned a company before. And so if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to step into this distressed business and turn it around, that is a major, major red flag, and you're just asking for bankruptcy. Sometimes, and I hear this all the time actually, people will say, hey, I found this great business. They've kind of gone on hard times the last couple of years, but there's a lot of opportunity, and I think I can buy it at a real good deal, like a real cheap price. And I just always remind them of Warren Buffett's quote, where he's like, I'm looking for a great business at a good price, not a good business at a great price. Like, you're looking for high quality, not low price. This is not a house. This is not real estate. This is not even stocks and bonds. This is a small business. And so you're looking for something where you're ready to pay a fair market value for a company that is fantastic quality. And so you're not looking to find a discount. So first and foremost, the quality of the business has to be phenomenal. And the way you gauge that is by putting together a very detailed checklist of all the things that you're looking for that attribute to that quality. So for instance, I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to look at the revenue. Is the revenue all project-based, or is it recurring? If it's recurring, that adds extra value. Nothing wrong with project-based, but recurring is better. And then of that recurring revenue, is it because I have repeat buyers? Is it because I have contracts in place? Are they annual subscriptions? How sticky are the customers? All of these are important questions to ask to find out what's the quality of the revenue I'm looking at. And all of that will feed into an overall score for the revenue itself. And then I'll look at the customer base. How diversified is it? Do I have individual customers that make up over 30% of my sales? Do I have 5 customers that make up 50% of my sales? Like, the lower concentration of customers to sales, the better. Because then I know if my number one customer leaves tomorrow, which does happen, I'm not going to lose 20% of my revenue overnight. That's really important, especially when you factor that back on the quality of your revenue. You can get a really good idea of how important those customers are to revenue. Now you're going to look at the exact same risk, but on the supplier side. How many suppliers do I have? What does that cost structure look like? If I buy this company and all my suppliers say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. New Owner, I'm going to raise prices 20% because I can, and you're new and you don't understand anything. Well, what does that do to my acquisition? What does that do to my cash flow? And so then after that, I'm going to start looking at all the different cultural aspects that we talked about. I'm like, what does the team look like? Are they leveraged to be successful? Is there management in place? And most likely not, but are there managers and foremen? Are there people who've been there for a long time? Long-term employees tend to tell me that the business itself, is a place where people want to stick around, at least for a while. What's the relationship between those employees and the owner? Like, what's that cultural dynamic like? And sometimes it's hard to gauge that, and you really have to fall back on your EQ, but there's a lot of ways that you can kind of figure that out tangentially, because a lot of these small businesses, they have a really good or really bad reputation in their local markets. So by reaching out to their suppliers and vendors and kind of feeling around the local area, you can get a pretty good idea of whether or not this is somebody you want to do business with. And as a result, you can kind of get a feel for the culture of the company. So that's just high level, but some very basics I would look at to kind of determine the overall value. And then broadly speaking, if I'm looking at an SBA company that is doing somewhere between $1 million and $5 million revenue, well, then that's kind of squarely into the traditional 3 to 5.5 type of, EBITDA multiple, which is if I take that EBITDA, or more likely the SDE, the seller's discretionary earnings, which is not the same thing. But if I take that and I multiply it by 3 or 4 times, I'm saying, how many years, if this cash flow stays consistent, is it going to take for me to pay it off? And that's the overall price. And typically, for these size businesses, you're going to see that 3 to 5 range. And that will be adjusted based on, all those factors we discussed. The better, higher quality, then the higher on that range you're going to get. And then the more competitive it's going to be, other buyers are going to be interested. And so there's always a range. It does range by industry. It does range by quality. Lots of factors, but hopefully that kind of gives you like a broad brush stroke.
Yes, I'm gonna hit up a couple points here, a couple questions. So let's just take it back to EBITDA real quick.
Yeah.
For our viewers, who might not even know what EBITDA is, but they're thinking about going into business, can you explain what EBITDA is?
Yeah, EBITDA is a made-up metric designed to help compare companies from different industries to each other to try to get an idea of what the profitability of that company is. And I say made up because it is completely made up. Some people hate it. Warren Buffett, famously hates it. But it stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And so what we're trying to say is, what is the cash flow profitability of this business before I start factoring all the non-business aspects of it, the depreciation, the taxes, all that kind of stuff. What is the operating margin? What is this company really spitting off as far as cash flow and profitability? And then I can take that number and kind of compare it to other companies to kind of compare them apples to apples. It's not that clean, but it's the best we have. It's all, they're all, you can imagine every business is different. The key difference though between EBITDA and SDE, which is seller's discretionary earnings, is that the vast majority of small businesses, especially in the 5 million revenue and under space, they're not put together like a real big corporation would be. So a lot of them aren't doing accrual accounting, and so they're unable to give you EBITDA even if they tried. But the biggest difference is that instead of trying to tell you like, here's my gross margin, operating cash flow, and then, oh, and by the way, that includes the seller's earnings, the seller's salary, and all that kind of stuff. What it's really saying is my discretionary earnings are after the business has paid for all of its business expenses, how much of that capital is left for the seller themselves to do whatever they wish with it. That's the money they use to pay themselves. That's their business distributions. That's their money that they can put back in the business if they choose to. So that's why it's discretionary, seller discretionary earnings. And it is different from EBITDA because EBITDA implies the fact that if the seller's working the business, then they're drawing a salary. And a lot of those other things are already in place. So you do need to know the difference.
Absolutely. And that's like the key, because people always say, oh, we should do 5 times EBITDA in this industry, 7 times EBITDA in that industry. And so basically you're saying year one, this is how much money this business makes. And it's worth about, 5 times that is what I'm willing to pay for it, because in theory, you'll hold it for about, 5-ish odd years before you sell it. So essentially, give or take, again, that's a very simplified way of looking at it, but it's essentially what the overall value of that business is.
Yeah, exactly. And to double touch on that, it's really important to remember that if you're buying as a self-funded searcher and you're taking out the SBA debt, you're not going to hold it for 5 years. You're probably going to hold it for the rest of your life, because 90% plus of small businesses will never sell. And so you have to walk into this situation believing that you're not special. Like you're not Mark Zuckerberg, you're not Warren Buffett. I do hope that you're phenomenally successful and you grow this business into something amazing and you get massive exit opportunities that nobody else gets. Like I wish all that for you. But if we're going to be honest and practical and risk averse, then we have to assume that if you buy a company, you're going to be the average, which means that you're probably never going to sell the company. If you buy an HVAC company in Dallas, Texas, you're probably going to hold that for the next 25 years. It's going to be a family-owned business, which means that return of capital in 5 years doesn't matter because you're probably not going to get a buyer, right?
Yeah.
And so keep that in mind. keep that in mind for what that means for you personally. It means you're not leaving Dallas. You're going to live there for a very long time. Your family's going to live there. You're going to be absolutely connected to this business. You're probably not, you're not moving. You're not taking extended vacations. It's going to take time for you to build to the point where you have management where you can step away from a lot of the day-to-day operations. So you have to be ready to roll up your sleeves and get involved. And so you're not a PE fund. You're a direct small business financial buyer. The other big thing to remember is that when you look at EBITDA, when you look at SDE, and you see that big chunky number, and it's like 900,000, you're like, oh, that's great, because then I could pay myself 300,000, and then I've got $600,000 to put back in the business, and this is going to be amazing. You have to remember that you're doing a leveraged buyout, which means that even if you have, by SBA standards, a conservative debt coverage service ratio of 1.5, then that means of that 900K, 450,000 of it is gone on day one to pay the debt. And so that $900,000 SDE number you're looking at is really 5 at best. And that's if it's correct. If the add backs are right, if everything is correct, that's what you're looking at. And so you have to assume that, that SDE number is going to be cut in half on day one. And you're not going to get that back for 10 years. And so you need to walk into that understanding how much cash flow is this actually going to produce after I buy the company. And then what does that do for my economic model? If I buy this company and I put that much debt on it and it reduces the cash flow in half, and by the way, I signed a personal guarantee, I'm not leaving, I'm probably not finding a buyer for a very long time, this is my baby. If that's the case, then what happens if we have a 2024 where we see the lowest number of people moving ever? And say your business is, maybe you're in construction. Well, now your business revenues dropped 40%, or you have a home moving company. Well, now that's dropped 90% because nobody's moving. If you're looking at, even the safer industries like plumbing or HVAC, let's say it gets really competitive and we see supplies go up because of tariffs, and now your overall profit margin has dropped 15 or 20%. Well, what does that do to your cash flow? And you can see very quickly how much risk you're taking on simply by adding the debt on the company. And so that a lot of times when I talk to buyers, that's the problem. They took on, all of this debt, and now right off the bat, they're having a real hard time making their debt payments.
Awesome. That's such good information and such a good way to think about it. And I actually should have asked you this when we were talking about the SBA loan. What is the typical loan length? Is it like a 10-year loan, 20-year loan, 5-year loan? Yeah.
I'll start off by saying that I'm not an SBA loan expert. And things have been changing pretty rapidly, especially I think in June of this year, they made a couple updates. But generally speaking, the way the SBA loan works for the 7A program is that you're capped at $5 million total purchase price. That's how much debt you can take out. You have to put in at least 10% down payment. Now, of that 10%, you can kind of mitigate it down a little bit, through a combination of seller's notes, full standby issues where, maybe you don't make payments on the seller note for a certain amount of time, or if it's completely subordinated to the SBA note. But generally speaking, you need to believe that you're walking in and you're putting 10% down on however much debt you're taking out. So if you're taking out $5 million, you have to come in with $500,000 in cash. And that cash can be a mix of your own money plus money that you've raised from investors. If you know other people who have money, they can pitch money into the deal for a small percentage of the ownership in your business. And from a personal standpoint, as someone who has bought companies before, and I've talked to a lot of people who buy companies, I highly recommend first-time buyers, especially if you're going to go the SBA route, take on as many investors as you possibly can. Yes, debt is cheaper than equity, and yes, you're going to give up some ownership, but I would rather own 65% of a successful business than 95% of a failed bankruptcy business that I've got a personal guarantee on. Because as a first-time buyer, I can't express to you how much you don't understand, and it is a learning curve, and you're putting on a lot of risk. I touched on that a little bit, just talking about the cash flow implications of the debt, the risks you run with sellers, the risk you run with the culture of the business, the simple economics around you of how that can impact you. And so give yourself as much breathing space as possible. By taking on additional equity, there's less debt and it gives you more space, more cash flow. So do that first. I promise you, if you own 65% of a company and you give the rest of it to a group of investors and you're successful, then the world opens up to you. If you want to do a whole co, if you want to do a roll up, you're going to learn very quickly how these things work and you're having some experience. But if it all fails, then that's a brutal outcome.
Yeah, and what I really like about that is if you have to convince a group of investors that it's a good idea to invest in this company, that's a second opinion. So you might think it's a great idea, but that's just validation that people agree with you that it's a good idea, and then it's also people that are invested in the success of the outcome.
Yeah, exactly.
And just want to wrap things up real quick. So there's a couple very important questions, and I'll let you answer them kind of both back to back. First thing is, what does day one look like? Like, okay, boom, you found this good business, you've made the money to buy it, you get the keys, now what? And then the second question is, what do you wish you could have told yourself 5 years ago?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So first and foremost, it's a whirlwind. It is very much like coming from as a veteran. It looks like change of command. It looks like the seller's on the way out, you're on the way in. It's a handshake. You got all the employees there, and you're like, hey, here's the new person, and then then it's you. It's you taking over, and it is a whirlwind. It's because it does not matter how much due diligence you do. There is going to be so much about that company you don't understand on day one, and frankly, for the next 12 months. And so it's a lot of work to make sure that you're meeting all your employees, you're meeting all your customers like quickly, like building those relationships, meeting all your vendors and suppliers, getting your hands around what does cash flow look like, what does the accounting system look like. Again, everything lives and dies by cash, and so you need to know that very, very quickly. Figuring out like what the current processes are. I guarantee you that there are not documented processes and systems in place. So you have to figure that out stuff too. Like a lot of the knowledge of a small business is walking around in somebody's head. It's not written down on a document somewhere. And so it does take a long time for you to learn the business and figure it out, especially if it's in an industry that you have no experience in. And so it's very much drinking from the fire hose. I think veterans are uniquely qualified in this space just because we're so used to moving from command to command. And even if you're in the same, career like AFSC or your jobs are always so much different. Like every base I went to, my job was completely different. Even if it was in the same career field, it was different. And so being able to step in and immediately be the dumbest person in the room, as far as how the business operates, but at the same time have to be in charge. That's something that veterans are uniquely positioned to do. So it's a mess, it's a whirlwind, it's a lot, but I think you as veterans, you're set up well for it. Now, remind me your second question.
What do you wish you could tell yourself 5 years ago?
Oh yeah, so much. The most important thing is I wish I could tell myself that I have no idea what I'm doing. And in a way, I kind of knew that. Like I was like, all right, well, I'm new and, I'm learning everything. And I was like voracious. I was reaching out to as many people who had done this before, learning everything I can, meeting with other searchers, meeting with other owners, reading, consuming podcasts, like so much to learn as much as I possibly could. But an analogy I give is that I talk to civilians all the time. And they ask you questions, and you'll know, but they're like, hey, Alec, what was it like to be in the Army, the Marines, the Navy? What was it like? What was it like to, go to boot camp or deploy? And we'll have those conversations. But you know that it doesn't matter how clear you are. They have no freaking idea what you're talking about. They'll never know. And part of that is because it's a lived experience. And the other part is because it's cultural. Like they're not indoctrinated into it. And so the best analogy I can give you is that if you've never owned a business, if you've never been personally responsible for the debt of that company, if you've never operated the P&L, then I cannot express to you what that's like. It is a completely different world. And it's amazing to me how many first-time buyers don't have the humility to know that you're walking into a completely different place where you know nothing and there is immense risk all around you. And I was one of them. Like I felt like I was pretty well prepared, and it's amazing how much I didn't know. And so I would absolutely recommend every single person, if this is something you're really interested in, understand that it is not just a career pivot, it is a life pivot. It is something that is absolutely going to change the trajectory of your career and your life. And you need to educate yourself as much as possible by people who have actually been there and done the work. And then also find a couple mentors who are physically doing the things that you want to do, that you think are success, and just make really good relationships with them and stay with them the entire way. Because when I look at a company today, there are red flags I see that I never would have saw on day one. And there is just so much. I could go on and on and on about all the lessons learned from my first acquisition that I look back and I think, man, what was I thinking? And maybe we can do that on a part two, but humility is key.
Jed, thank you so much for all that. I know we have hit time. You've got an investor call. You're a busy man, so we'll try to see if we can set up a part two. But we are so grateful for your wisdom and the honest conversation.
Thanks, Alec. Happy to be here. Happy to support Services School any way I can.
All right. Thank you so much, Jed. You take care.
All right.